The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Camilla Parker adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder. She had been invited to a private reception honoring young members of the royal family, but her mind was elsewhere. For months, she had been building her social media presence, and controversy seemed to be her ticket to fame and fortune. Her latest plan was perhaps her boldest yet. Camilla had no royal blood, but she shared a name that carried weight in England. She was a distant cousin of the Duchess of Cornwall, though the connection was so remote it barely counted. Still, she used it shamelessly, dropping hints in interviews and on her popular Instagram account that she had insider knowledge of Palace's life. Her followers ate it up, and brands paid handsomely for her endorsements. The reception hall buzzed with quiet conversation as diplomats, charity workers, and select members of high society mingled. Camilla spotted her target almost immediately. Princess Charlotte, daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, stood near a window with her governess, looking poised beyond her years. The young princess wore a simple blue dress and spoke politely with an elderly woman who had dedicated her life to children's literacy programs. Camilla's photographer friend, Marcus, had positioned himself strategically in the corner. They had rehearsed this moment. All Camilla needed to do was create a scene dramatic enough to go viral, and Marcus would capture every second. The plan was simple but risky. She would approach Princess Charlotte and make comments loud enough for others to hear. Comments that would question the young girl's readiness for her future role. Taking a deep breath, Camilla walked across the room with deliberate steps. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, drawing a few curious glances. She held her phone in one hand, pretending to check messages, while actually ensuring the voice recording app was running. Everything needed to be documented. As she approached, the governess noticed her first. The older woman's expression shifted slightly, a professional smile masking what might have been concern. Camilla had been flagged before by palace security for her social media, posts that stretched the truth about royal connections. She was on thin ice. She knew it. Camilla stopped just a few feet from Princess Charlotte and spoke in a voice that carried across the nearby groups. The room wasn't large, and she knew her words would reach many ears. She commented on how young the princess looked, how unprepared she seemed for the weight of her future responsibilities. She questioned whether someone so sheltered could ever understand the real world, or lead with any authenticity. The governess stepped forward immediately, her voice firm but controlled. She asked Camilla to please lower her voice and show respect. But Camilla had come too far to back down now. She raised her voice further, saying that the British people deserved to know if their future queen was being raised in an ivory tower. Disconnected from reality, she made gestures with her hands that seemed dismissive, almost mocking. Princess Charlotte, to her credit, remained remarkably composed. Her face flushed slightly, and her hands clasped together in front of her, but she didn't cry or run away. She had been trained for moments of public scrutiny, though perhaps not for something quite this personal and cruel. The young princess looked at her governess, seeking guidance, her eyes showing confusion more than fear. Other guests had stopped their conversations now. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by Camilla's continued commentary. She pulled out her phone and appeared to be filming, though she held it at an awkward angle. She asked Princess Charlotte directly if she felt she deserved the privileges she had been born into. If she understood what ordinary children faced every day. That's when the royal guard arrived. 2 officers in formal uniform had been stationed near the entrance, and they moved with swift purpose across the room. Their approach was silent but commanding, their expressions neutral, but their intent clear. Behind them came a palace security coordinator, a stern woman in a dark suit who had dealt with situations like this before, the lead guard. A tall man with decades of service etched into the lines of his face positioned himself between Camilla and the princess. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. He informed Camilla that she was disrupting a private royal event and that her behavior constituted harassment of a minor member of the royal family. He asked her to come with him immediately. Camilla's confidence wavered for the first time. She had expected to be asked to leave, perhaps even banned from future events. But the guard's tone suggested something more serious. She glanced around the room, suddenly aware that every face was turned toward her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Even Marcus had lowered his camera, his face pale. She tried to laugh it off, saying she was just asking questions that the public wanted answered. She claimed freedom of speech, journalistic inquiry, the right to hold powerful institutions accountable. But her voice had lost its earlier boldness. The guard repeated his request, this time with a hand gesture toward the door that made it clear this was not optional, as Camilla was escorted from the room. She caught a glimpse of Princess Charlotte being gently led away by her governess. The young girl looked back once, her expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pity. That look would haunt Camilla in the days to come. Though she didn't know it yet, the palace security office was located in a less glamorous part of the building, down a corridor where the ornate decorations gave way to practical functionality. Camilla was shown into a small room with a table and several chairs. The security coordinator, who introduced herself as Mrs. Thornberry, took a seat across from her while the guards remained by the door. Mrs. Thornberry's questions were direct and thorough. She asked about Camilla's intentions, her plans for the footage and recordings she had made, her motivations for targeting a child. Camilla tried to maintain her story about public interest journalism, but under Mrs. Thornberry's steady gaze, her explanations sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The coordinator explained that the palace took threats to the royal children extremely seriously. What Camilla had done wasn't just rude or inappropriate, it potentially crossed legal boundaries. Harassment, intimidation of a minor, trespassing with malicious intent, and possible violations of privacy laws. The list seemed to grow longer with each sentence. Camilla felt her stomach drop. She had imagined controversy, perhaps a temporary ban from royal events, maybe even a strongly worded statement from palace officials that would only boost her profile. She had not imagined criminal charges. She tried to explain that she meant no real harm, that she was just trying to start a conversation. But Mrs. Thornberry's expression remained unchanged. The police were called. Not palace security, but actual metropolitan police officers with the authority to make arrests. As Camilla waited in that small room, reality began to sink in. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her purse with notifications. It's probably Marcus trying to reach her, but she was too shaken to check it. The afternoon that was supposed to launch her into viral fame was instead turning into a nightmare. When the officers arrived, they were professional and methodical. They explained that she was being detained for questioning regarding harassment of a minor and disruption of a royal event. They read her rights. Words that Camilla had heard countless times on television shows, but never imagined would be directed at her. Her hands trembled as one officer took her phone and placed it in an evidence bag as she was led out through a side entrance of the palace. Away from the public areas, Camilla caught sight of her reflection in a window. She barely recognized the frightened woman staring back at her. Just hours ago, she had been confident, ambitious, certain that she was taking a bold stand. Now she was in police custody, facing consequences she hadn't fully considered. The police car drove through London streets that Camilla had walked countless times. But everything looked different now. Pedestrians and tourists went about their days, unaware that inside one unmarked vehicle, a woman's life was unraveling. She thought about her social media followers, her brand partnerships, her carefully constructed image. All of it felt suddenly fragile, built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath her. The police station was nothing like the glamorous settings Camilla usually frequented. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the walls were a depressing shade of gray that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who entered. She sat in an interview room, her designer clothes feeling ridiculous in this environment, like a costume she had forgotten to take off after a performance that had gone terribly wrong. Detective Sarah Mitchell entered, carrying a thick folder and a tablet computer. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes that suggested she had seen every kind of excuse and explanation imaginable. She sat down across from Camilla and arranged her materials on the table with careful precision. The silence stretched uncomfortably before the detective finally spoke. The detective explained that the palace had provided security footage from multiple angles, as well as statements from witnesses. There were also the recordings that Camilla herself had made, which had been recovered from her phone. Detective Mitchell asked if Camilla understood the seriousness of what she had done. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was genuine. As if the detective truly couldn't fathom what would drive someone to harass a child, Camilla tried to explain her perspective. She talked about how the royal family lived on taxpayer money, how they should be subject to scrutiny, how the public had a right to know about the people who would someday reign over them. She insisted she wasn't attacking Princess Charlotte personally, but rather questioning a system that elevated some children above others based solely on birth. Detective Mitchell listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When Camilla finished, the detective opened her tablet and played back one of the security videos. Camilla watched herself on screen, gesturing dramatically, her voice loud and accusatory. She saw Princess Charlotte's face, the confusion and hurt that flickered across it. She saw the moment when the young girl's composure nearly broke, when her lower lip trembled before she caught herself. Watching it from this angle, removed from the adrenaline and righteousness she had felt in the moment, Camilla saw something different. She didn't see a brave journalist holding power accountable. She saw an adult woman intimidating a child. She saw someone who had used a little girl as a prop in a desperate bid for attention. The realization hit her like cold water. She felt shame rise hot in her chest. The detective explained the potential charges. Harassment was the most obvious, but there were others. Breach of the peace, malicious communications if her social media posts were found to encourage others to target the princess. Even potential violations of laws protecting children from exploitation. The words seemed to pile up, each one adding weight to the crushing reality of her situation. Camilla asked about bail, about when she could leave, but Detective Mitchell shook her head. Given the high-profile nature of the case and concerns that Camilla might use social media to influence witnesses or public opinion, she would be held overnight at minimum. A court appearance would be scheduled for the following day, and then decisions would be made about her release conditions. The cell where Camilla spent the night was small and cold. A thin mattress on a metal frame, a toilet with no seat, and a tiny window too high to see out of. She lay on the mattress fully clothed, unable to sleep, replaying the day over and over in her mind. She thought about all the choices that had led her here. All the moments when she could have stepped back, but instead pushed forward. Her mind went to her parents, who would be worried sick by now. She had missed dinner with them, and they would have tried to call her. By now, they probably knew something was wrong. She imagined their faces when they learned what she had done. The disappointment that would cloud her father's eyes, the worry that would age her mother overnight. They had always supported her ambitions, but had warned her repeatedly about her increasingly controversial tactics. She thought about Marcus, her photographer friend. He had probably posted the photos by now, unless the police had gotten to him too. Part of her hoped he had, that at least something would come of this disaster. But a larger part, the part that was emerging from beneath layers of ambition and ego, hoped he hadn't. The thought of Princess Charlotte's hurt expression being shared across the internet made her feel physically ill. Morning came slowly, announced by the sound of other prisoners stirring and guards changing shifts. Camilla was given breakfast, which she couldn't eat, and allowed to wash her face in a small sink. She was then processed for her court appearance, given back her belongings, minus her phone, and transported to the magistrate's court. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Less dramatic than the legal dramas she had watched, the magistrate was a severe-looking woman in her 60s who regarded Camilla with the kind of expression usually reserved for particularly disappointing students. The Crown prosecutor laid out the charges with clinical efficiency, describing Camilla's actions in terms that made them sound even worse than she remembered. Her court-appointed solicitor, a young man named David Chen, who looked barely old enough to have finished law school, did his best to argue for bail. He emphasized that Camilla had no prior criminal record, that she had cooperated with police, that she had stable housing and family ties in the area. He carefully avoided trying to justify what she had done, focusing instead on practical matters of flight risk and public safety. The prosecutor argued strenuously against bail. She pointed out that Camilla had a significant social media following and had demonstrated a willingness to use her platform to target members of the royal family. There was concern that if released, she might continue to post about Princess Charlotte, potentially encouraging her followers to similar actions. The prosecutor also noted that there had already been online threats against Camilla herself, which raised security concerns. The magistrate listened to both arguments, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Her face gave nothing away. When the lawyers had finished, she sat back in her chair and regarded Camilla directly. The silence felt eternal. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of years spent making difficult decisions. Bail would be granted, but with strict conditions. Camilla was forbidden from using any social media platforms directly or through others. She was not to go within 500 meters of any royal residence, or any location where members of the royal family were scheduled to appear. She was required to surrender her passport. She would wear an electronic monitoring tag. And perhaps most significantly, she was forbidden from discussing the case publicly in any way. The magistrate also delivered what felt like a personal rebuke. She spoke about the special responsibility that adults had toward children, about how Princess Charlotte had done nothing to deserve being targeted, about how privilege did not make cruelty acceptable. She said that if Camilla had legitimate concerns about the monarchy, there were appropriate channels and methods for expressing them, none of which involved confronting a child. Camilla was released into her father's custody. He had come to court with her mother, both of them looking 10 years older than they had just 2 days ago. Her father signed the necessary papers while her mother stood silent, unable to meet Camilla's eyes. The drive home was uncomfortable, the air thick with things unsaid. When they finally reached her parents' house, where Camilla would be staying while awaiting trial, her mother made tea with automatic movements, and the three of them sat around the kitchen table. This was the same table where Camilla had done her homework as a child, where the family had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where life had once felt simple and full of possibility. Her father finally broke the silence. He asked her what she had been thinking, his voice more sad than angry. He didn't understand how his daughter, whom they had raised to be kind and thoughtful, could have done something so cruel. He reminded her of how she had once defended younger children from bullies at school, how she had volunteered at a children's hospital during her gap year. Where had that person gone? He wondered aloud. Camilla tried to explain about the pressure to grow her brand, about how the social media landscape rewarded controversy, about how she had convinced herself she was doing something important. But as the words left her mouth, they sounded empty. She had known what she was doing was wrong, she realized. She had simply chosen to ignore that knowledge because it conflicted with her ambitions. Her mother asked about Princess Charlotte, whether Camilla had stopped to consider how her actions would affect the young girl. Had she thought about how it would feel to be publicly humiliated at such a tender age, to have adults questioning your worth and your future? The questions hung in the air, and Camilla had no good answers. That night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Camilla pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not for social media, not for public consumption, but for herself. She wrote about the moment she had first decided that controversy was a viable path to success. She wrote about the small compromises she had made along the way, each one making the next easier. She wrote about the expression on Princess Charlotte's face, an image that was now burned into her memory. She also thought about what came next. Her trial was scheduled for 3 months away, plenty of time for the media circus to build. Already she knew her actions would be dissected across every platform. Some would defend her as speaking truth to power. Others would condemn her as a bully who had targeted a child. Neither side would fully capture the complicated truth of what had happened and why. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams where she was the child being confronted by angry adults, where she was Princess Charlotte looking up at her own face twisted in anger, where she was standing in courtrooms that stretched on forever. She woke repeatedly, each time needing a moment to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. The weeks following her release were perhaps harder than the night in custody had been. Camilla found herself trapped in a strange limbo, unable to engage with the digital world that had defined so much of her adult life, unable to move freely around the city she had always called home. The electronic monitoring tag on her ankle was a constant reminder of her new reality. Its presence felt with every step she took. Her phone sat on her dresser, Stripped of all social media applications as required by the court order, without Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, the device felt almost useless. She was allowed to make calls and send texts, but the absence of those familiar apps created a void that surprised her with its intensity. She had not realized how much of her daily routine had been built around checking notifications, posting updates, and maintaining her online presence. David Chen. Her solicitor visited regularly to prepare for trial. He was thorough and patient, but also brutally honest about her situation. The evidence against her was overwhelming, captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by dozens of people. Her own recordings only made things worse, he explained, as they demonstrated premeditation. She had planned this confrontation, prepared for it, and executed it with full awareness of what she was doing. The prosecution was building a case that went beyond a single incident. They had subpoenaed her social media history going back years, looking for patterns of escalating behavior. David showed her printouts of her own posts, things she had written and then forgotten about, comments about various royal family members that danced right up to the line of harassment, speculations and accusations presented as insider knowledge, images she had manipulated to make herself appear closer to royal events than she actually had been. Seeing it all laid out chronologically was disturbing. Camilla could see the trajectory of her own descent, the way each controversial post had garnered more attention, training her to seek validation through provocation. She remembered the rush of watching her follower count climb, the thrill of brand deals coming in, the sense of importance that came with being quoted in tabloid articles. It had all seemed so harmless at the time, just playing the game that everyone played. David explained that the prosecution would likely argue this wasn't an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern. They would paint her as someone who had become increasingly obsessed with the royal family, willing to cross more boundaries to feed her need for attention. The incident with Princess Charlotte would be presented as the inevitable result of this escalation. A woman who had lost sight of basic decency in pursuit of online fame. The media coverage was relentless and split, sharply down partisan lines. Some outlets portrayed her as a villain who had traumatized a child for personal gain. Others framed her as a victim of an overreaching establishment, punishing someone for asking uncomfortable questions. Neither version felt entirely accurate to Camilla, but she was powerless to respond or correct the record. Her silence, mandated by the court, was interpreted in whatever way fit each outlet's narrative. More disturbing were the messages that reached her despite her social media ban. People found her email address, her parents' address, even her old phone number. Some messages were supportive, praising her courage and offering to help with legal fees. Others were vicious, calling her every name imaginable and suggesting punishments far worse than anything the court might impose. She learned to stop reading them. But knowing they existed was burden enough. Her parents tried to maintain normalcy, but the strain showed. Her father had taken time off work to be home with her, worried about the threats and the media attention. Her mother cooked elaborate meals that Camilla barely touched, channeling worry into culinary effort. They didn't speak much about the case, as if avoiding the subject might make it less real. But it hung over every interaction like a storm cloud. One afternoon, Camilla's mother suggested they visit the small garden behind the house. It had been Camilla's sanctuary as a child, a place where she had played and dreamed and felt safe. Now, even this space felt tainted by what she had done. As they sat on the weathered bench, her mother finally said what had clearly been on her mind for weeks. She talked about responsibility, about how adults had a duty to protect children, not hurt them. She spoke about Princess Charlotte as a real person, not just a symbol or a headline, but a young girl who would carry the memory of that confrontation for the rest of her life. She asked Camilla to imagine how it would feel to be that child. To have your worth questioned publicly by a grown woman? To feel unsafe in spaces that should have been secure? Camilla found herself crying, something she had not allowed herself to do since the incident. The tears came hard and fast, years of repressed emotions breaking through the wall she had built around herself. She cried for Princess Charlotte, for her own lost sense of self, for her parents who had to watch their daughter destroy her own life, for the future she had thrown away in pursuit of something that now seemed utterly worthless. Her mother held her while she cried, offering the kind of unconditional comfort that only a parent can provide. When the tears finally subsided, Camilla felt emptied out, but also somehow clearer. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge what she had done without justifications or excuses. She had hurt a child. Nothing else mattered as much as that simple, terrible fact. David called a few days later with news. The palace had released a statement, carefully worded and brief. It acknowledged that an incident had occurred and that legal proceedings were underway. It thanked the police and security services for their swift response, and then, unexpectedly, it included a single line that changed everything. Princess Charlotte was doing well and was surrounded by family and support. That one line hit Camilla harder than any of the legal threats or public condemnation. The palace could have said nothing about Charlotte's well-being. They could have used the statement to condemn Camilla more harshly. Instead, they had chosen to focus on the child's recovery, to reassure the public that she was okay. It was grace that Camilla had not earned and did not deserve. David also mentioned that he had been approached by the prosecution about a possible plea arrangement. Given the strength of their case, they were willing to offer a deal that might result in a shorter sentence and possibly alternatives to prison time. But there would be conditions, requirements that went beyond the standard legal penalties. The prosecution wanted evidence of genuine remorse and concrete steps toward making amends. Camilla asked what that meant, and David explained carefully. It would likely involve a formal apology. It's delivered in a way that reached the public, but wasn't about rehabilitating her image. It would require genuine engagement with the harm she had caused, possibly including working with organizations that supported children who had been bullied or harassed. It would mean accepting full responsibility without qualifications or excuses. The idea terrified her. Apologizing publicly meant exposing herself to even more criticism and anger. It meant acknowledging her wrongdoing in a permanent, unchangeable way. But the alternative was going to trial, where prosecutors would spend days detailing every terrible thing she had done, where witnesses would testify about the fear and confusion they had seen on Princess Charlotte's face, where a jury would decide whether she belonged in prison. That night, Camilla began writing an apology. She wrote dozens of drafts, each one feeling inadequate or self-serving. How did you apologize for something like this? What words could possibly convey genuine remorse without sounding like a calculated attempt to reduce punishment? She struggled with the balance between honesty and humility, between explaining her mindset and making excuses. She showed one draft to her mother, who read it carefully and then shook her head. The apology talked too much about Camilla's own journey and not enough about Charlotte. It explained her motivations when it should have focused on the impact. It asked for understanding when it should have simply expressed regret. Her mother suggested she start over with one simple question. What would she want to hear if someone had hurt her child? With that guidance, Camilla wrote something different. She addressed Princess Charlotte directly, acknowledging that a child should never have been put in that position. She took full responsibility without explaining or justifying. She recognized that no apology could undo the harm, but offered it anyway, because it was the only thing she could give. She promised to do better, to be better, not for public approval, but because it was the right thing to do. David reviewed the apology with a critical eye. He warned her that it would be dissected by media commentators. Some would find it insufficient, while others would dismiss it as strategic. But he also acknowledged that it seemed genuine, that it focused on the right things. He would present it to the prosecution as part of plea negotiations and see how they responded. The waiting was agony. Camilla spent her days helping her mother around the house, reading books that had nothing to do with social media or celebrity, and taking long walks in the neighborhood within the boundaries of her restrictions. She found herself noticing things she had overlooked for years. The way light filtered through leaves, the sound of children playing in nearby gardens, the small kindnesses of strangers who didn't recognize her. One evening, her father suggested they watch an old family video. It was from Camilla's 10th birthday, before smartphones and social media had consumed so much of life. The little girl on screen was joyful and unself-conscious, excited about simple things like cake and games with friends. Her father asked what advice that little girl would give to the adult Camilla had become. The answer was obvious and painful. The child she had been would never have imagined hurting another child for any reason. That little girl had believed in fairness and kindness, in treating others the way she wanted to be treated. Somewhere along the way, Camilla had lost touch with those basic values, placed them with ambition and a hunger for validation that could never be satisfied. When David finally called with news about the plea negotiations, Camilla felt strangely calm. Whatever happened, she knew she deserved it. She had made choices that hurt an innocent child, and now she would face the consequences. The only question that mattered was what kind of person she would become afterward. David Chen arrived at the house early on a gray Thursday morning. Carrying his leather briefcase and wearing an expression that Camilla had learned to read, the prosecution had responded to their plea proposal, and his careful neutrality suggested the news was neither entirely good nor entirely bad. They sat in the living room while Camilla's parents hovered anxiously nearby, trying to appear busy, but clearly waiting to hear what would be said. The prosecution had accepted the framework of a plea deal, David explained, but their terms were more extensive than he had initially anticipated. They wanted Camilla to plead guilty to harassment of a minor and breach of the peace. In exchange, they would recommend a sentence that included community service, substantial fine, mandatory counseling, and a suspended prison sentence. The suspended sentence was key, because it meant Camilla would avoid immediate incarceration, but would face prison time if she violated any conditions. In the next 2 years, the conditions themselves were strict and far-reaching. Beyond the apology that had already been drafted, Camilla would be banned from all social media platforms for 3 years, not just as a temporary measure, but as part of her sentence. She would be required to complete 500 hours of community service with organizations supporting child welfare and anti-bullying initiatives. She would undergo regular counseling sessions, focused on understanding the impact of her actions and developing healthier approaches to seeking validation and success. Additionally, any income she had earned from social media in the year leading up to the incident would be donated to charities chosen by the court. The prosecution had calculated that amount to be nearly £70,000, money that Camilla had spent on rent, clothes, travel and lifestyle expenses that now seemed obscenely frivolous. She would also be required to pay court costs and a separate fine intended to reflect the seriousness of her offense. David gave her time to absorb the information before asking what she wanted to do. He reminded her that she could reject the deal and go to trial, that she had that right. But he also laid out what a trial would likely mean. Weeks of testimony, constant media coverage, witnesses describing her actions in devastating detail, quite possibly a harsher sentence if convicted. The prosecution had a strong case, and juries tended to be protective of children, especially when those children were as sympathetic as Princess Charlotte. Camilla looked at her parents, who had been silent throughout David's explanation. Her father's face showed resignation, mixed with relief that she might avoid prison. Her mother looked older than she had just months ago, the stress of the situation having taken a visible toll. These people had given her everything, supported her dreams even when they had concerns. She had repaid them with humiliation and heartbreak. She owed them better than dragging this out through a lengthy trial. She told David she would accept the plea deal. Her voice was steady, almost calm. She had known this moment was coming, had spent weeks preparing herself for consequences that would fundamentally alter her life. The path forward would be difficult and humbling, but it was also clear. She would acknowledge what she had done, accept her punishment, and try to become someone worthy of the second chance she was being offered. The court hearing where she would enter her plea was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Camilla tried to prepare herself mentally and emotionally. She practiced saying the words guilty aloud, forcing herself to own them without qualification. She reread her apology letter, making small refinements, but trying not to overthink it. She went through her belongings and began boxing up items associated with her social media career. Clothing worn for promotional posts, equipment used for content creation, all the trappings of a life she was leaving behind. Her old followers and brand partners had mostly abandoned her by now. Some had posted carefully worded statements distancing themselves from her actions. Others had simply stopped following and moved on to the next influencer, the next trending personality. The speed with which she had been forgotten was both painful and oddly liberating. She had devoted so much energy to building and maintaining that audience, and in the end, none of it had been real or lasting. On the morning of the hearing, Camilla dressed carefully in conservative, respectful clothes. No designer labels, no statement pieces, nothing that could be construed as attention-seeking. Her mother had offered to come with her, but Camilla declined. This was something she needed to face on her own. Her father drove her to the courthouse, and they sat in the car for a few moments before going in. He told her that he loved her, that nothing she had done changed that. He said he was proud of her for taking responsibility, even though he was disappointed in the choices that had led to this moment. He reminded her that she was young enough to rebuild her life, that this didn't have to define her forever. His words brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for tears later. Right now, she needed to be strong and face what she had done. The courtroom was packed with journalists, court observers, and others whose interest in the case ranged from professional to purely voyeuristic. Camilla walked to the defendant's box with her head up but her eyes downcast, conscious of the scrutiny but trying not to let it overwhelm her. The magistrate who had presided over her bail hearing was there again. Her expression as severe and unreadable as before. The charges were read aloud. Formal legal language that somehow made her actions sound both more technical and more serious than she had imagined. When asked how she pleaded, Camilla spoke clearly into the microphone provided. Guilty. The word echoed in the suddenly quiet courtroom, acknowledgement that felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. She had done this. She was guilty. Saying it aloud made it undeniably real. The prosecution presented their case briefly, outlining the incident and its impact. They played a portion of the security footage, and Camilla forced herself to watch it again, to see herself as others saw her. The prosecutor spoke about Princess Charlotte's distress, about the potential long-term psychological impact of being publicly humiliated and threatened by an adult. They acknowledged that Camilla had cooperated with the investigation and had expressed remorse, which was why they were recommending a sentence that included alternatives to immediate imprisonment. David then stood to present the defense's position. He didn't try to minimize what Camilla had done or shift blame elsewhere. Instead, he focused on her recognition of wrongdoing, her willingness to make amends, and the steps she had already taken toward personal growth. He spoke about the impact the case had already had on her life. The loss of her career and reputation, the public condemnation she had faced. He argued that the proposed sentence would serve both punitive and rehabilitative purposes more effectively than prison time would. Then came the moment Camilla had been dreading and anticipating. The magistrate asked if she wished to address the court. Camilla stood, her legs shaky, but her voice clearer than she expected. She read from the apology she had written, the words she had agonized over for weeks. She spoke directly about Princess Charlotte, acknowledging the fear and confusion she had caused. She took full responsibility without excuses or explanations. She expressed remorse that went beyond regret at being caught. Genuine sorrow for the pain she had inflicted on a child who had done nothing to deserve it. She also spoke about what she had learned from this experience, about how the pursuit of online validation had warped her values and judgment. She acknowledged that she had lost sight of basic human decency in her quest for attention and success. She promised to use her community service not just to fulfill a legal obligation, but to genuinely help young people who had been victims of bullying and harassment. She committed to becoming someone better than she had been, not because a court required it, but because it was the right thing to do. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Camilla sat down, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The magistrate reviewed the plea agreement in detail, asking questions to ensure Camilla understood all the conditions and consequences. She confirmed that Camilla was entering the plea voluntarily, that she understood she was giving up her right to trial, and that she accepted the proposed sentence. The magistrate then delivered her own remarks. She spoke about the special vulnerability of children and the responsibility adults had to protect them. She noted that Camilla had targeted Princess Charlotte not because of anything the child had done, but because of who she was. using her position as a way to generate attention and controversy. The magistrate acknowledged Camilla's apology and expressions of remorse, but emphasized that words alone were insufficient. True remorse would be demonstrated through actions over time. The sentence was then formally pronounced. Everything David had outlined was made official. The guilty plea, the suspended prison sentence of 18 months, the 3-year social media ban, the 500 hours of community service, the mandatory counseling, the financial penalties. The magistrate made it clear that any violation of these conditions would result in immediate imprisonment. She also added that Camilla should consider herself fortunate that Princess Charlotte's family had not pursued additional civil remedies, and that such generosity should not be taken lightly. As the hearing concluded, Camilla felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. It was over in one sense. The uncertainty of waiting for trial was done. But in another sense, it was just beginning. She now had 3 years of restrictions and requirements ahead of her. 3 years to prove that her remorse was genuine and her commitment to change was real. Outside the courthouse, media cameras were waiting, but Camilla walked past them with her head down, saying nothing. She was forbidden from discussing the case publicly, but beyond that, she had nothing to say that hadn't already been said in court. Her father was waiting by the car. They drove home in silence that was somehow comfortable. The silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. The following week, Camilla began her community service at a local charity that supported children who had experienced bullying. The director, a woman named Helen with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, made it clear that she knew about Camilla's case and had mixed feelings about having her there. But she was willing to give Camilla a chance to prove that her remorse was more than legal strategy. The work was humbling. Camilla filed paperwork, answered phones, helped organize events, and did whatever tasks were needed. She met children who bore emotional scars from being targeted by their peers. Kids who struggled with anxiety and depression because they had been made to feel worthless. Listening to their stories, seeing their pain, made her think constantly about Princess Charlotte and the lasting impact her actions might have had. One afternoon, a girl about Charlotte's age came in with her mother. She had been severely bullied at school, and the experience had left her afraid to speak in groups or meet new people. As Camilla watched the girl struggle to answer basic questions, shrinking into herself whenever attention turned her way, she felt the full weight of what she had done. This was what trauma looked like. This was what it meant to make a child feel unsafe and unworthy. She had done this to Princess Charlotte, or something very much like it. Her counseling sessions were equally challenging. The therapist, a patient man named Dr. Rahman, pushed her to examine not just what she had done, but why. They explored her relationship with social media, the dopamine rush of notifications and viral posts, the way external validation had gradually replaced internal satisfaction. They discussed the childhood experiences that had shaped her need for attention, the insecurities that had driven her to seek fame at any cost. Through these sessions, Camilla began to understand that her actions at the palace had been the culmination of years of poor choices and unhealthy patterns. Each decision to post something controversial, each boundary she had pushed for engagement, each time she had prioritized her brand over her values. These had all been steps on a path that led inevitably to hurting an innocent child. Changing would require more than just avoiding similar incidents. It would require fundamentally re-examining who she was and who she wanted to be. Months passed, and gradually, Camilla began to find a new rhythm to her life. Without social media, she had more time for reading, for conversations with her parents, for pursuits that brought intrinsic rather than external rewards. The community service, while initially just an obligation, started to feel meaningful. She was making small but real contributions to an organization that helped vulnerable children. The work wouldn't undo what she had done, but it was something positive built on the ruins of her old life. One day, nearly a year after the incident, Camilla was sorting through donated books at the charity when she came across a newspaper that someone had left behind. A small article caught her eye. Princess Charlotte had made a public appearance at a children's literacy event. The photo showed her smiling, engaged with other children, looking confident and happy. The caption noted that she had recently given a short speech about the importance of kindness and treating others with respect. Camilla stared at the photo for a long time. The princess looked none the worse for their encounter, surrounded by support and presumably receiving help to process what had happened. Part of Camilla felt relief at this evidence that Charlotte had recovered, but another part felt the familiar ache of shame. This resilient, kind child had been targeted for no reason other than Camilla's own selfish ambition. Nothing would ever make that okay. As Camilla's second year of restrictions began, she started receiving requests from schools and youth organizations to speak about her experiences. They wanted her to talk to young people about the dangers of social media addiction, about the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions, about the very real consequences that could come from poor choices. At first, she was reluctant, worried that it would seem like she was trying to profit from her infamy or rehabilitate her image. But Dr. Rahman encouraged her to see it differently. Sharing her story honestly, without attempting to minimize her guilt or paint herself as a victim, could genuinely help young people avoid similar mistakes. It would be uncomfortable and humbling, standing in front of teenagers and admitting to her failures. But discomfort wasn't a reason to avoid doing something worthwhile. After considerable thought, Camilla agreed to speak at a local secondary school about digital citizenship and online behavior. The first talk was terrifying. 30 students sat before her, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Camilla told them her story without embellishment or excuse. She talked about how social media had gradually consumed her life and distorted her values. She described the moment when she crossed a line that should never have been crossed and the consequences that had followed. She didn't ask for sympathy or understanding. She simply laid out the facts and let the students draw their own conclusions. The questions afterwards were pointed and sometimes harsh. Students asked why she thought it was okay to attack a child. They asked if she really felt sorry, or just sorry she got caught. They challenged her apology and questioned whether she deserved a second chance. Camilla answered honestly, acknowledging when she didn't have good answers, refusing to deflect or make excuses. By the end, several students seemed genuinely affected by her honesty, and a few even thanked her for her willingness to be so candid about her mistakes. These speaking engagements became a regular part of Camilla's community service. Each one was difficult, forcing her to relive her worst moments and face judgment from young people who had every right to be critical. But they were also meaningful in a way her old social media posts had never been. She wasn't performing or curating an image. She was simply being honest about her failures and hoping that others might learn from them. As the end of her 3-year social media ban approached, Camilla realized something surprising. She didn't miss it. The person she had been, the one who measured her worth in followers and likes, felt like someone else entirely. She had built a quieter life, one based on genuine relationships and meaningful work, rather than public performance. The thought of returning to social media held no appeal. That chapter of her life was closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. On the 2-year anniversary of the incident, Camilla wrote a letter, not for publication, not for any audience beyond one person. She addressed it to Princess Charlotte, though she knew it would likely never be delivered. In it, she reiterated her apology and her hope that Charlotte had not been permanently harmed by what happened. She described the changes she had made in her life and the work she was doing to help other young people. She acknowledged that she had no right to forgiveness, but wanted Charlotte to know that her actions had sparked genuine change in at least one person's life. She sealed the letter and gave it to David Chen, asking him to forward it through appropriate channels if possible, but understanding if it couldn't be delivered. Whether Princess Charlotte ever read it or not, the act of writing it had value for Camilla. It was a private acknowledgement of harm done and responsibility accepted. With no audience to perform for and no benefit to be gained, as her restrictions finally ended, Camilla found herself at a crossroads. She was now free to use social media again if she chose, free to move about without electronic monitoring, free to rebuild a public life, but the freedom that had once seemed so important now felt less like an opportunity and more like a test. She had spent 3 years becoming someone different, someone better. The question was whether she could maintain that growth without the external structure that had enforced it. She decided to continue her work with the children's charity, taking a paid position that would allow her to make it her career rather than just community service. She continued speaking at schools about her experiences, turning her past mistakes into cautionary tales that might help others avoid similar paths. She maintained the counseling relationship with Dr. Rahman, recognizing that personal growth was an ongoing process rather than a destination to be reached. Years later, when people occasionally recognized Camilla and asked about the incident, she didn't shy away from discussing it. She owned her past fully, neither dwelling on it nor pretending it hadn't happened. She had hurt a child in pursuit of fame and attention, faced consequences for that action, and spent years trying to become someone better. It was a story without a neat redemptive arc, without complete absolution, but it was honest. And sometimes, when Camilla saw news of Princess Charlotte, now growing into a poised young woman, she felt that familiar pang of regret mixed with something like pride. Not pride in herself, but in Charlotte's resilience and grace. The princess had moved past that terrible afternoon, had continued to grow and thrive despite having been targeted and humiliated. If there was any redemption in Camilla's story, it lay not in her own transformation, but in the fact that she had not succeeded in permanently damaging someone who deserved only kindness and respect.